This word in your ear, Mark, is brought to you thanks to NordVPN. And VPN, remind me, Mark, stands for...
Tattooed upon my memory, it stands for Virtual Private Network.
What is that, Mark? It's a way to keep your data safe on the internet whenever you're logging in, either at home or abroad. It's a disreputable dockside cafe, such as might be frequented by Mr. Alex Gold. And VPN protects your identity and encrypts your data so that nobody can steal their identity. But there's also, it enables you to access the internet via servers in more than 50, count them, 50 different countries. That means you can often sidestep region restrictions and stream movies and television programs from around the world. Do you know what I've been looking at this morning?
No, go on.
I've been looking at via some foreign server. I've been looking at David Lean's 1942 film, In Which We Serve, in which Noel Coward plays a rather unlikely figure of Dickie Mountbatten, because it's based on Mountbatten's wartime adventures, and some would say misadventures. The reason I'm reading this, I was watching that, is I'm currently reading a corking book, which is the story of the Mountbattens. So Mountbatten and his wife, and he was the most dashing officer in the British Navy and the best connected with royalty. And she was the most beautiful and also the wealthiest woman in London.
Yeah, piping hot couple.
Just absolutely piping hot.
In every respect.
Couple. So piping hot that In Which We Serve, they do the opposite of what a movie adaptation usually does, which is they rather play down the glamour of the couple playing them in the film, because there was no way they could equal the actual Mountbattens themselves. And that's what I've been watching via NordVPN. Anyway,
Noel Coward in it's surely worth the ticket, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely! It's a brilliant film.
I just adore him.
Yeah. So anyway, you can take advantage of a deal where you can try NordVPN by going to nordvpn.com/yourear, or just use the code YourEar to get a huge discount off your NordVPN plan and one additional month for free and a bonus gift. Risk-free, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee, and full details, as ever, are below.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
We begin with a Stack Waddy game, just a quick one. Have you got a pen and paper, Mark?
I have.
Okay, write these.
You too, viewers.
Write these four down, okay? Sampha, Sampha.
Yep.
Skepta, Skepta. Little Sims, little Simz. And finally, Scarpa, Scarpa, okay?
Yep.
One of those is an Italian sportswear brand. The rest won the Mercury Music Prize.
Well, I know Little Sims won the Mercury Music Prize because it was just a couple of nights ago. So we're down to Scarpa, Skepta and Sampha. Ooh, Skepta sounds real to me, and it sounds edgy and it sounds a bit hip-hop. So it's down to Scarpa and Sampha. Sampha is a Norwegian?
No, I said one's an Italian sportswear brand, and the rest won the Mercury Music Prize.
Okay, Sampha is the Italian sports brand.
You're wrong. They won the Mercury Music Prize in 2017.
Okay.
Scarpa is an Italian sportswear brand because Scarpa is apparently the Italian for shoe. There you go.
That's very good.
So,
it.
They'd say it just.
You win.
I thought it was an interesting reflection on the fact that so many of the winners of the Mercury Music Prize are completely forgotten a few years later. I felt rather sorry for them handing out the Mercury Music Prize this week. And I think also this week it was the Booker Prize, wasn't it?
It was.
It was. And you thought, there's no publicity whatsoever because absolutely all eyes were trained on the madness in Downing Street and Westminster.
Completely.
That just
sucked all the energy from everything else,
absolutely
didn't it?
All the energy.
And every newspaper was kind of the first 12 pages would be, some terrible shenanigans with Liz Truss. It was amazing.
I tell you what, one thing I thought about Liz Truss and the sacking of Liz Truss, or not sacking, resignation or whatever, and also then the same week of Steven Gerrard as Aston Villa manager.
Yeah,
my son went to Fulham the other night, and that was the last game, and it was the traditional, you're getting sacked in the morning, chance. Poor bloke wasn't even sacked in the morning. He was sacked immediately after the match, and then had to get on the coach back to Birmingham with the team. And the people who fired him.
Oh, Jesus
You imagine
Christ.
that. And it made me think that the higher you climb, as a general point, the greater the humiliation of the fall. And most of us just never get to know what that's like. The level of pain and humiliation that people in those kind of exalted positions have to go through when that exalted position.
There is no more exaggerated version of that than Truss at the moment. It's absolutely
It's just
incredible.
unbelievable. And it made me think of what I consider to be, controversial this, Bruce Springsteen's best song.
Go on.
This is a song which he has recorded himself, but not a very good version. The best version is done by Southside Johnny on a record called Better Days. And the song is called All the Way Home. And the opening lines are as follows. I know what it's like to have failed with the whole world looking on. I know what it's like to have been so sure and to wake up and find it all gone. I find those lines really moving.
They are.
And very few people have ever written a song about that kind of thing. And that can only apply to have seen something go wrong with everybody watching. And I've always taken it that somehow, and I have no reason to believe it, but this is my interpretation, that he wrote that song after the failure of his first marriage, where you may remember in the mid-'80s, at the absolute height of Born in the USA, Viva,
huge publicity.
He married
model.
Julianne Phillips.
Yeah.
In huge publicity, and they were the most romantic, fabulous couple and so forth. And then it was all over within not even a year. It's absolutely extraordinary how quickly it went wrong.
Echoes of that in various subsequent records.
And I always think that must have been at the back of his mind when he wrote that song, And so most of us, when we fail, when things go wrong for us, everybody isn't looking at all, you know what I mean? Whereas the ceremony of humiliation involved in Liz Truss,
It's absolutely phenomenal because as everyone says, she's not a kind of historical statistic. She's a pub quiz answer. It's that terrible, isn't it? Somebody posted something which I thought was very haunting. Actually, it was kind of soft point, but it's very haunting, saying that her reading the lesson at the Queen's funeral. Yeah. Is akin to those big moments in a family history, like, for example, a wedding, where somebody turns up with a new boyfriend or a new girlfriend, and that person is in all the pictures, and that relationship only lasts about 2 months, and then they've split up with them. But for the eternity of those photographs, people are looking at this picture and goes, who's that? And there will be footage of the Queen's funeral in years to come. You're thinking, who's that reading the lesson? I've got absolutely, of course, yes. It's the woman who was the shortest. And it's the shortest historically since prime ministers began.
Oh, absolutely.
And the next one up, I think, died of tuberculosis or something after 133 days.
Canning, yes.
Was it Canning? Yeah, I can't remember now. It is absolutely.
And I make one more observation that I haven't read anywhere, actually, but obviously you can't read everything about this stuff. One, the figure of her husband standing by her.
Yeah.
Which I thought was quite romantic. Actually.
It was really romantic.
And also, I tell you what's also interesting, because, you and I are old enough to remember when Margaret Thatcher was the first female leader of a British political party, and then was subsequently, Prime Minister. It was a huge deal, wasn't it? It was a woman.
Huge deal.
And who's her husband? And and loads of focus on the children and so forth. And now we've had 3, albeit quite briefly in the third case. Liz Truss, it seemed to me, came into Downing Street and went out with hardly any mention of her family at all.
No, we don't even know the names of her kids, and we don't really even know how old they are. I think she's got 2 daughters aged about 10 and 12. I may be wrong, but even so...
Generally speaking, we feel as a nation, it's not our business, really.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite interesting when you consider, the United States, the prospect of a woman in the highest office is still pretty distant.
It is.
Whereas we've sort of got used to it.
Yeah, and you can't help but feel for that family.
Oh, my God, yeah, absolutely.
Can you imagine them going to school? I mean, it's just absolutely frightful. But anyway, and hard though it is to extend her any sympathy on that level, on a domestic level, you can't help but feel really sorry.
Oh, I listen, in any human being with any that kind of high-profile humiliation, I feel sorry for them, They may have got themselves into that situation, but that doesn't stop me feeling some twinge of sympathy for them.
So, do you feel any sympathy for James Corden? Now, that's a slight parallel, but it's like a different area, obviously. But James Corden, extraordinary story, which is everywhere, isn't it? About him going to this restaurant in New York and for the second time being very abusive and uncooperative about the quality of the food. He found a hair in his food, didn't he? Okay, fair enough. You would be upset. But I don't know. I mean, what happened, we don't know. But didn't it make you feel that it would be a terrible time to be a famous person? Because absolutely everything you do is being scrutinised and being broadcast. And how unbearable life would be, don't you think?
I think it's terrible on any level to be abusive to waiting staff. Anyway.
Oh yeah, no, it's
just
wrong.
Absolutely wrong on any level. And the kind of, do you know who I am element of it can only make it worse. Undoubtedly, that's the case. However, I think if I'm a restaurateur and I have a problem with this kind of thing, there's 2 ways to deal with it. One is to tell the person that they are not welcome to come back any longer. Yes?
Yep.
And I think that's the kind of sensible, measured way to do it. And then the other way is to take to social media, like these people have done, and kind of try and get the world to pile on, which I just do not think is right, No,
it's not right, but you can see how much publicity value there is in it for the restaurant, a restaurant that we wouldn't be talking about otherwise. It's completely wrong. Do you know, we used to talk about on this podcast, and not that long ago, we used to talk about and massively send up Van Morrison for all his idiosyncrasies about avoiding the general public. Do you know, I'm starting to feel some sympathy now with these people. I don't know about you, but Van Morrison had this thing where he wouldn't eat in a restaurant unless he could be booked into a table in a corner with his back to a wall and with 2 or 3 people either side of him so that no member of the public could approach him and come up to him and talk to him during his meal. And I used to think that was unreasonable. I don't so much anymore. John Lennon used to famously once flew on a first-class ticket on a jumbo to Japan, booked 16 tickets for him and his wife and his friend Elliot Mintz and Sean. 16 tickets so that every seat adjacent to them was empty, so that nobody could talk to them. I can remember thinking, that's unreasonable and ridiculous, but I don't know if it is now. Can you imagine? Can you imagine that everywhere you go, it's like that thing Stuart Lee always says about every time Stuart Lee goes out, every step of the way someone is recording. I've just seen Stuart Lee in a cafe looking miserable and sad. I've just seen Stuart Lee going into Tesco's. I've just seen Stuart Lee doing so. Everything you do is recorded, and everything is somebody puts some kind of spin on it, and it must be unbearable.
The Word Podcast, prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
So 2 questions about the Beatles' Revolver. One, was it recorded in less time than Liz Truss was Prime Minister? You can do your working out.
I think I know this because they started recording it on the 6th of April. 1966, and they finished on June the 21st. But if you look at it...
Oh, really? It's not far off then.
No, but if you look at the day-to-day, what they did every day, a large amount of that time, they were not in Abbey Road. They were doing other things.
Right.
So I reckon that actually the total recording, I'm sure someone will correct me, but I think it was somewhere around the region of 12 days. It was 220 hours in total.
Oh, wow.
And if you imagine that's a 12-hour day, that's 18 12-hour days.
It wouldn't be 12.
There's only a record that I could find of them actually being in the studio for 12 days. So was Revolver recorded in less time than Liz Truss was promised her? I think it was, yes. Which is astonishing, isn't it, in terms of actual days? I know.
So my second question, because a newspaper rang me up this week and asked me, well, say, well, why is it the Beatles' most consequential album? And I thought about this. I'm not sure it is, really. They were really interested in why was more fuss made about Sgt. Pepper than Revolver. Well, I can tell them the answer to that, because I remember this at the time. The reason so much fuss was made about Sgt. Pepper is two reasons. One, it was the first record they made after they stopped touring, and then therefore they were making it over what appeared to be a long period.
Yeah, it was the length of time.
It was the length of the time.
The level of expectation.
And all the news stories prior to its launch was, they've spent 600 hours in the studio, whatever it was. And that was one reason a huge amount of fuss was made about it. And the other reason a huge amount of fuss was made about it was the cover. I really do believe that.
Yeah.
It's because the cover was a kind of event in itself, and was colour and was fold out and all that. But going back to, Revolver and the most consequential album, I mean, it's a brilliant, brilliant record, no doubt about that at all. I don't think it is the most consequential Beatles album.
No, I've got another option too, actually. But go on, what's yours?
Mine is A Hard Day's Night.
Yeah, that's
the most consequential, because it's the first one that they wrote it all themselves. You're going to have to make an album, boys, to go with this film you're making. Okay, you're going to have to write some songs. You might have to write as many as 6. Okay, we'll do that. And then we'll write another 6 for the other side. Actually, 7 on the first side, 6 on the other side. And we will write them all ourselves. And nobody had done that before, except with the possible exception of Billy Fury. The album The Sound of Fury, he wrote all the songs, albeit not all under his own name. Sometimes he used Bumble Wycherley, sometimes he used Billy Fury. But I don't think even Billy Fury's, stoutest supporters would suggest that The Sound of Fury is quite as good as A Hard Day's Night.
But I think that there are consequential things about Revolver, definitely. One is the cover, actually. The one is the cover. I think that was a major departure. If you think that up till that point, most covers were still tended to be the band.
Yes.
And that was a real departure, and I think inspired all sorts of people like The Fool would have gone off on the basis of that and gone off on a different tangent. So that's important. I think the fact that their personalities are so clearly expressed on it is what paved the way for the White Album. The White Album being really just, a lot of it, a series of songs written by one person using the others as backing musicians. And I think it's true on Revolver. You look at Eleanor Rigby, Here, There and Everywhere, Got to Get Into My Life. They're so uniquely Paul McCartney. I'm Only Sleeping, Tomorrow Never Knows. So uniquely Lennon.
Yeah, that's true.
And the Harrison songs, Love to You, the Indian music sitar thing, I Want to Tell You, Taxman, it's very much their personalities. And that was their point, but they really defined their own personalities as opposed to being just the group. And the other thing that everyone always talks about is the level of experiment. But if you look at the experiment, actually, a lot of them are quite conventional songs. The really big experimental songs are Tomorrow Never Knows, songs sung on one note, with all sorts of, McCartney's tape loops and, Lennon's voice filtered through a Leslie speaker and all that. And also Yellow Submarine, actually, with all its sound effects, That's a huge, huge departure. But those are the things that lay the foundation for stuff like A Day in the Life and for Mr. Kite and stuff. But I think rock critics tend to think that's the glorious Beatles stuff. But I'm not sure if that's true. And I agree with you with Hard Day's Night, because Hard Day's Night is where they refine that template of those crisp, melodic, tuneful, immortal immensely memorable tunes, which carried them through all the way. That's what I think you remember of the Beatles. It's more She Loves You and Penny Lane than it is A Day in the Life, really.
Yeah.
And the other really consequential record, I think, in a way, was Abbey Road, because I think Abbey Road's probably the one that people tend most to listen to. It's the most contemporary.
It is.
It's the easiest to listen to. There's none of that kind of context that you have to take in. What were they trying to do at the time? It's just an absolutely beautiful series of songs. And it's just it just works, and it works today, you know. So I don't know. A Revolver, I can see its importance, but I think I'm with you on A Hard Day's Night. I think that's the underrated one.
You're listening to the Word Podcast, where the time is whenever you want it to be.
We were talking to Danny Baker the other day, and he was talking about how he was selling all his records. He's got 12,000 records.
He's serious. I thought he was bluffing when he first started talking.
No, he's been tweeting about it for a while, hasn't he? Because he wants to move house, and therefore, if you're moving house, you've got to do something. You've got to move them somewhere. Are you going to move them to another location, or are you going to get rid of them? But it was very interesting. He was saying that he'd... the magic of owning records, of physically owning them. I mean, he still plays music all the time. He tweets every night about some track that he's playing. But the whole business of actually playing them on vinyl, he said, it lost its magic, hadn't it? He said the chewing gum had lost its flavour on the bedpost overnight. And I thought that was really interesting. And obviously he's got some fantastically valuable records there. But he's selling them all, I think, it's pretty much as a job lot. A Pantechnicon is going to turn up, cart them all away.
Auction house.
We were both rather moved by it, weren't we? We just thought it was kind of... You know,
I felt very sad.
Everyone getting old. Just these moments in your life, these moments where you realise things are changing. And I can remember an old pal of ours called Simon Gulliford once telling me, he was talking about these life stages, and he said, I can remember a life stage where I bought a new car. And I got into the new car. He was in his mid-30s. I got into the new car and I turned on the engine. And the radio came on and it was tuned to Radio 2. He said, and I didn't feel the urge to retune it. And I thought, that's really interesting. And Danny's gone through a sort of version of that to some extent, which he's suddenly decided that whole part of his life, collecting records, going to record fairs, buying and selling on eBay, it's kind of over. It's lost its magic.
You see, I never did any of that stuff. I never, very rare exceptions, bought anything on eBay or, you know, never been to a record fair in my life. You know, that whole world has kind of grown up, and I have no knowledge of it whatsoever. I'm aware of the fact that there are far more collectors now than there ever were back in the day, you know, and that people half my age know far more about the records I got, for instance, than I would know myself, you know. Yeah. I know those things because I remember them at the time, you know, I can remember them in context. And I've never thought about getting rid of them, even though I kind of slimmed them down from time to time. But I never thought of getting rid of them, and they became even less reason to get rid of them when I started writing books, because you then are photographed and so forth in front of all those records, and so people think of you as kind of inseparable from those records, as if you go round in the street with them on your back, you know?
Backdrop permanently there,
and you know, they're a bit of a statement and all that kind of stuff. But still, you're aware of the fact that, oh God, what are you going to do with them ultimately? You know, and I've said this before. My son came up here a while ago and looked at them and said, "What are you going to do with these things?"
Yeah, make it quite clear he didn't want them.
He didn't want them, and as we talked about in a recent podcast,
he doesn't have any records, does he?
None of my three children, all three of them between them, they don't have
own any records.
Don't own a single physical record of anything. Which is really interesting.
It is.
And
but the thing I thought,
but it's the idea of kind of turning in. You know, it's like talking out. It's like telling tales out of school here. My wife still teaches. Yes.
Yeah.
And I don't wish to be ungentlemanly, but she's past retirement age. Yes. But she still teaches. Why does she still teach? Because she doesn't want to give up. because once you stop, you've stopped.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And that just makes you feel sad. It's as simple as that.
true.
It's not rational at all, but that's the way it is. You know? And
You want to close that particular book.
absolutely.
You can't reopen it.
Now, I suppose if Danny is moving to a smaller house and so forth, there'll be every reason why you can't, accommodate that number.
There is, but there's still that element of, it's a very cliche thing to say, but there's such a difference between listening to a track on your computer or getting out the record and listening to that record, the ceremony of listening to that record in its entirety while looking at the sleeve, while being teleported back to the moment in time when that record was made. Those are all really, really important things. And you can't, without the actual physical vinyl, that ceremony doesn't really exist.
No.
And I think you'd miss it, really.
Yeah.
And you finish up not having the experience of listening to the whole record in sequence, just the odd track. And I don't know. I felt it was a major statement. And also that I felt he might miss them. I mean, Danny famously once threw away a load of singles. Do you remember that? It's recorded in one of his memoirs. Yeah. He found too many of them in a shed or something. He just went and dumped them in a skip. And then several years later, somebody rang on his door and he said, "Did you ever leave any singles in a skip? Because I picked them out and I've got them and you can have them back." And he desperately regretted it the moment he'd done it.
So, I'm not getting rid of mine anytime soon, as plans currently are. And also, you kind of, if you like Charles Dickens, for instance, you've got some Charles Dickens books, haven't you?
Yeah.
You haven't read them on a Kindle, have you? You just haven't, because there is, over and above the pleasure of reading them, there is kind of the pleasure of owning them. There's the pleasure of being near them, of being aware that they're over there. You can
flicking through them, finding a phrase or a moment,
or whatever. And I was talking to a woman actually. I was sitting next to the thing at the literature festival the other day, who was a big kind of literary critic and novelist and so forth. And we were talking about books. And she was asking me whether I ever wrote inside books. And I don't really. You do, don't you?
I do. I make notes of them, which it makes them hard to resell because I've scribbled on them, in pencil.
And she said one of the great joys of getting a book is finding pencil marks from some other reader inside.
Oh, right. Oh, that's good.
And I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah.
And I've just been reading a biography of Harold Wilson written by Ben Pimlott.
Yeah.
It's been about 20 years ago or whatever. And I borrowed it from the library. And that's got pretty much all the way through it. Particular sentences underlined and then in the margin, an exclamation mark. And I can only think it's some other biographer of Harold Wilson. It's his way of kind of raising his eyebrows at the assertion that Ben Pimlott made at some point in the book, as if to say, "I think you'll find."
I would double check your facts, sir.
Whatever.
Yeah.
It's only another biographer would go through a book and would do that. So
I love those little notes inside books when people have just messages to the people they've given the book to. I think that's rather sweet too. I don't know why. Just something just adds a little, the idea that book was so treasured in the past by somebody else. It was rather moving, I think.
It's very odd when you find a new book, a relatively new book, with an inscription inside, to Peter. I do hope you enjoy this. And then 3 months later, you've clearly bought it in a charity shop. So Peter clearly didn't
enjoy it.
He just didn't even open it. Took it straight down the charity shop because it was taking up too much space at home.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
So, any other business? We're joined by Alex Gold. Are you all right, Alex?
I'm all right, yeah. I'm currently sailing to Canada, to actual Canada.
Sailing to Canada.
From
Sounds
America.
like a song, doesn't it?
It's very exciting.
Indeed.
So what have we been doing this week?
We've done a load of recordings. We did a fantastic interview with Simon Sebag Montefiore about his... he's got this new book called The World. What a great title.
Here it is.
A history book called The World. There it is. It is.
It is just...
12 and a half.
Honestly,
100 pages.
It's fantastic. It's The World, a Family History. This is, and so the twist is that you tell the story, the history of the entire world via families. And so if you open this book absolutely anywhere, and it's in its thousands of pages, you'll find somebody stabbing somebody in the back at some point, whether it's in ancient Egypt or, 19th century France or in Westminster just the other day. Yeah. It's absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah, he says he wrote it really in lockdown, didn't he? And so it's surrounded by plague and obviously the war in Ukraine. You think those themes are just on every page.
Absolutely.
Nothing has changed.
Nothing new. And whatever's going on in the UK at the moment may seem like a terrible, upset, but it's a little local difficulty in terms of the history of the world. So we talked to him, and he's
made this playlist, hasn't he? He's made this fantastic playlist. Of which we should post actually at the end of this, of 213 songs with a historical connection. It's really good, really interesting.
And he's looking for further additions to that list if you want to.
So we've done him. We talked to Craig Brown as well, the satirist, private eye writer, reviewer, columnist. Absolutely fantastic. Very funny, talking about comedians too, just how extraordinary they are. The lives of Tommy Cooper, the lives of Kenneth Williams, all these guys. Also very good on band leaders, wasn't he? He was talking about how, being a band leader, you have to be pretty ruthless. And, there's a wonderful story about Bruce Springsteen stopping people playing table tennis backstage. Do you remember that story?
Got rid of the table tennis table.
Got rid of the table because, because they were late on stage one night or something like that. And the kind of ruthlessness that you require if you're going to be Mick Jagger.
Bruce Springsteen.
He had really good theories about Keith Richards versus Mick Jagger too. And thinks that Keith Richards is a bit of a fraud. Quite good. Quite good stuff. And the other person we should mention, I think, is Jackie Abbott. There's a great... Word in Your Attic with Jackie Abbott, where she talks about, people don't tend to do this that much. They tend to talk about music in terms of stories and anecdotes. I remember the time I went to see, the specials at the Music Machine or whatever. But she talks about music as a kind of soundtrack, as a cinematic soundtrack. There's a lovely bit where she talks about being, I think she's in her early teens, and she remembers looking out of her window at the lights of St Helens up near Liverpool and listening to the Cocteau Twins. And it's just the most beautifully described, beautifully well expressed monologue, soliloquy. It's really worth hearing, the Jackie Abbott thing. Jackie Abbott, she, of course, of Beautiful South. And the story of her joining the Beautiful South is a very, very good story too. It's great.
It involves potatoes.
It does.
So that's all there on YouTube. And don't forget, as ever, if you're following us on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and, and like and so forth. Because all those kind of things
and also,
really make a difference.
Click the bell.
You'll
see a little bell come up on your mobile phone. If you watch YouTube on a mobile device, when you watch one of our many videos, you'll see a bell come up. You click that bell and you are automatically notified when a new one appears. It's a good thing to do.
All that kind of thing is very much appreciated. And if you'd like to become a Patreon supporter, and why not, go to patreon.com/wordinyour-ear for details of how you can do that. What else have we got to talk about, Alex? We've got a bit of a Christmas social coming up for our Patreon supporters. Go on.
Yes, put November the 14th in your diaries.
Yep.
And we'll be announcing that in due course. But that will be a Patreon-only event. So if you're not signed up to Patreon already, make sure you do that.
Now's your chance.
Now's your chance.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.